Bobby Kennedy, on a November day in 1963, had come home from work at the Justice Department with a couple aides. And he had had a swim at his pool at the estate in Hickory Hill, just outside of Washington in McLean, Virginia. And he was settling back to have a great lunch and eventually to go back to work. At that moment, when he just started eating lunch, the phone rings, and it is the hotline to the White House. And by the way, there were more hotlines to the White House in his estate in Hickory Hill than there were in the vice president's residence back then, which was a huge bone of contention for Lyndon Johnson. But anytime that phone rang, it was generally not good news. And it was especially not good news when the guy on the other end of the line, the way it was that day, was one of the people that Bobby Kennedy most hated in the world, an FBI director named J. Edgar Hoover. And J. Edgar Hoover tells Bobby Kennedy, in a voice that Bobby Kennedy would generally describe as a monotone that was like J. Edgar Hoover had found in other communists on the faculty at Howard University. He says in that monotone voice, "Your brother has been shot." An hour later, somebody calls back and says, "Your brother is dead." And that moment changed Bobby Kennedy's life in a way that was different than just losing his brother. He had lost his brother, he had lost his best friend, and he had lost his whole sense of purpose. Bobby Kennedy had been close enough to his brother from the time that they went overseas when they were both in their 20s, that the idea that Jack Kennedy was gone was a world changer for him. And yet something happened magically for the next month. The Kennedy family was, as you would imagine, totally distraught, and somebody had to take charge. And it was Bobby Kennedy for the next month. He gave out assignments to the family. You will take care of mom. You will break the news to dad, who's just had a stroke. You will do all these things that need to get done. It was Bobby Kennedy who went to the White House and decided whether or not it would be an open casket. It was Bobby Kennedy who held the hand of Jackie Kennedy and John and Caroline when they were devastated. They had lost their father. They had lost, in Jackie's case, the husband. It was Bobby Kennedy who helped the country that was going through a kind of mourning that for their young president was deeper and more profound than they had ever had happen. It was Bobby Kennedy who was the nation's mourner-in-chief for the next month. And that was quite an extraordinary thing that he managed to do, given how devastated he was. But at almost a magical moment, exactly a month out from the death of Jack Kennedy, when the family started pulling it back together and they went back to work and to their lives, and when the country had ended their period of mourning and they were starting to pull it together, Bobby Kennedy lost it. He went for the next 7 months through something that today we would describe as a clinical depression, and that Ethel remembers 50 years later like it had happened a moment ago. He basically would go out in the middle of the night and drive around in his car not knowing where he was going. He would go to work and couldn't sustain any attention in the meetings at the Justice Department. He had essentially lost his sense of what he was doing in the world. He debated about whether he should become a college professor, and I'm convinced he would have made a miserable college professor, and he never seriously thought about it, but everything was on the table. He debated whether he should take his $10 million inheritance and go out and just travel around the world with his wife and his kids. He debated about a lot of things, and what he ended up doing was running for senator from New York, and it wasn't until the middle of that campaign that he really started coming out of his depression. It was at a moment when he realized he could actually lose an election, which would have been a first for Kennedy, that he started having a sense of two things. One is that he really did have something still to contribute, and the other, as critically, was that people were responding to him. People were turning out in droves to all of his rallies, not because he was Jack Kennedy's surviving brother, but because he was Bobby Kennedy and he had something to offer.